Chapter 21, First Performance. His words hung in silence. The sleepers looked at Sonny with a hilarious assortment of emotions, ranging from bewilderment to shock. The young man with humorous eyes just smiled politely. To be honest, getting an ascended aspect during the first nightmare was extremely rare. He was certainly someone special, maybe even outstanding. Actually, despite their apparent differences, the young man somehow reminded Sonny of hero Oro of the Nine. There was a special type of calculating coldness hidden deep inside their eyes. He had encountered such people before, mostly among the veterans of various street gangs in the outskirts. They simply called this type of coldness murder math. Basically, it was a habit experienced fighters developed, no matter where they were and what mood they were in. There was always a sober part of their minds, constantly calculating the most efficient way of killing the person in front of them, just in case such need arises. Why do I have to antagonize someone like that, of all people? But Sonny really had no grounds to complain. After all, he brought this on himself. After a few seconds, one of the young man's companions finally blinked and said, Friend, you must not know a lot about the spell. Caster's results are truly remarkable." Then, with a furtive glance at the remarkable caster, he added, "He is a legacy, after all." An actual, living and breathing descendant of an awakened clan, Sonny re-evaluated his opinion of the humorous young man. Legacies were known to be trained for their eventual entrance into the spell from the moment they could walk. For them, being infected was a certainty instead of a possibility. They were extremely formidable people. "Just great," he thought bitterly, and made his frown deepen. "Are you trying to pull a prank on me? You call this remarkable?" The bewilderment in the eyes of these sleepers was slowly being replaced by hostility. "Listen, friend, if you don't think that an ascended aspect is remarkable, then please share with us your own amazing results. What, pray tell, was your appraisal?" Caster himself was still keeping quiet and smiling. However, his defenders were growing restless. This was exactly what Sonny wanted to happen. He smiled with utter contempt. "I would let you know my appraisal was, it was glorious. Yes, glorious. And the aspect I acquired was of the divine rank." After that, he received a number of strange looks. No one had ever received a divine aspect before, so of course, they were starting to think that he was a lunatic. But there was still a sliver of doubt, maybe that strange guy was a descendant of a powerful clan, a peerless prodigy. Maybe his appraisal was, indeed, glorious. Sonny had to dispel that tiny bit of doubt. "Mind you, I'm not some lofty legacy. But I'm from the outskirts. I've never even received combat training. All that training, and he only got an excellent—" What did he do during the nightmare? Pick his nose the whole time. The expressions of all the sleepers that were listening to his bragging instantly changed. An outskirt rat with no training? Yeah, sure. Who was he trying to fool? Finally, with the same polite smile, Caster spoke. "Glorious, that is interesting. Would you mind telling us what were your achievements in the nightmare?" Sonny grinned. "Sure, no problem. First of all, I killed an awakened tyrant. Every cost him a couple of moments of intense pain, but he didn't let it show on his face. His expression was nothing but smug and confrontational. The mere mention of a tyrant, let alone an awakened one, made a couple of sleepers smile with ridicule. "Oh really? How did you kill it?" An arrogant look appeared on Sonny's face. "How, let me tell you, I didn't even have to lift a finger. I just spat, and it was torn to pieces." Which was true. Sonny had spat a mouthful of blood on the altar, and as the result, Mountain King was ruthlessly dismembered by Shadow God. Someone openly laughed. "This guy is either insane or purposefully messing with us. Listen here, shorty, have some decency, okay? Who would believe such a lie?" Sonny was genuinely angry. He wanted to retort, saying that he wasn't short, but he couldn't. Because that would be a lie, damn it. So instead, he just gritted his teeth and said with a voice full of outrage, I can't answer that because it's not a lie. Are you really insisting that you had killed an awakened tyrant, a tyrant, and with a bit of spit no less? Sonny knitted his brows. That's the truth. Maury laughter followed. Crazy bastard. He actually believes in his own crap. Insane, he's insane. Unexpectedly, Caster stopped his companions. Guys, after the laughter quieted down, he asked in a friendly manner, what else did you achieve? What, that wasn't enough? Sonny raised his chin. Let me think. Oh, I also killed an awakened swordsman. Really? How did you do that? Acting as though he was a little bit embarrassed, Sonny looked down. That time I had to lift a finger. I even had to shake it a couple of times. That was enough to kill him, though. He was holding the silver bell between his fingers, which led to Hero being attacked and eventually killed by the tyrant. So, technically, all his statements were true. What a crackpot. Ha, can you believe this idiot? Poor bastard, not only is he weak, he's also lost it. Caster gave his companions a long look and then turned to Sonny. Anything else? Sonny blinked, time for the finishing touch. Something else? Oh right, I communicated with a bunch of gods even though they were all dead. I made one of them wake up. He gave me a blessing. I was blessed by a god, do you all understand? The sleepers were silently shaking their heads or looking at him with pity. Caster sighed. I see, well, in comparison to your achievements, mine do look rather average. Thank you for sharing with us. I hope you'll be as successful once we enter the dream realm. Sonny smiled with a look of smug superiority on his face. You better believe it. With that, he turned around and walked away. That's a job well done. He was pretty sure that after this performance, no one would ever believe that he actually had some kind of a powerful aspect or did anything worthy of notice during the nightmare. He only told them the truth and yet managed to make everyone believe in the opposite of the truth. Such an incredible feeling. What did they think of him now? They thought that he was weak, grew up without any education in the outskirts, and had no training. More than that, he was apparently either insane or incredibly stupid. His temper was terrible. Truly pathetic and pitiful fellow. Now, whenever he was asked about his aspect, he could just honestly say that it was of the divine rank and be laughed at. People would rather believe that the spell had ceased to exist than that he was someone noteworthy. He could even scream about his accomplishments from the roof, and no one would believe him. Subsequently, no one would ever suspect that he had a true name. Just you wait, fools. One day I'll be the one laughing. As Sonny was walking away, he heard one of the sleepers talking to Caster. Why didn't you put that lunatic in his place? He has belittled you. After a short pause, Caster answered. His voice sounded low and mellow. Poor kid must have lost his mind in the nightmare. It often happens. He'll most likely die soon, so being kind is the least I can do. The corner of Sonny's mouth twitched. What a nice guy. He knew that Caster's words were based on a false assumption, but for some reason, still felt a cold chill running up his spine. Chapter 22, Corpse Corner. Satisfied with his performance, Sonny walked back to the deserted corner of the hall. He felt people looking at him with mockery, contempt, and pity. No one seemed to be willing to stay close to him. It was just as well. He didn't want to be bothered anyway. Still, weren't their reactions a bit exaggerated? It's not like he was carrying an infectious disease. Well, except for the spell. But it wasn't really a disease, which everyone here should have known already. Finally, he extricated himself from the crowd and reached the corner. For some reason, sleepers were unwilling to approach it. Currently, there was only one girl sitting quietly on the bench. Sonny gave her a look. The quiet girl was delicate, demure, and very pretty. Her clothes were tidy and neat. They weren't very expensive, but still rather tasteful. With her pale blonde hair, big blue eyes, and exquisite face, she looked like a beautiful porcelain doll. She was subtly breathtaking. However, there was something wrong with her. Sunny frowned, trying to understand what exactly about the girl made him uncomfortable. After a while, he realized that her empty, expressionless stare was reminding him of Mountain King. Startled, Sunny understood that the girl was blind. It took him a couple of seconds to compose himself. What a shame. A bit disheartened, he carefully sat on the opposite end of the bench. The girl wouldn't have survived the first nightmare if she had been blind prior to entering the spell, which meant that she lost her sight as the result of the appraisal. It was her flaw. Suddenly, Sunny felt very apprehensive. A cold sensation spread through his chest. And I thought my flaw was bad. No matter what aspect ability the blind girl had received in exchange for her sight, it was effectively a death sentence. A blind person had no chances of surviving in the dream realm, at least not with a dormant core. In some sense, the girl was already dead. She was effectively a walking corpse. Feeling extremely disturbed, Sunny turned away and studied the crowd of sleepers. Now he understood why people were trying to avoid this corner. The girl was surrounded by an invisible but almost palpable aura of death. Sleepers usually weren't very superstitious, but anyone would feel uncomfortable in her company. Armed with this knowledge, Sunny suddenly saw a pattern in how the young people in the hall were grouped. Instinctively, they all tried to stand close to those of their own circumstance. At the far end of the hall, closest to the stage, were one or two small groups. People in these groups were distinct from the rest of sleepers. They were all confident, calm, and had an air of readiness. These were the legacies. They were trained for the spell since birth and had the highest chances of survival. Caster especially stood out from the rest. Next to them was a larger number of expensively dressed young people. They were lively and excited, and only a little nervous. They were the scions of rich and high-ranking citizens. Their training was pretty good since such families had ample funds to hire private tutors, even awakened ones. Their chances of survival weren't bad. Then there was the largest part of the crowd, which consisted of kids from middle-class families. They might not have had the privilege of training under awakened tutors, but their education wasn't bad. The government spent a lot of effort to put all the necessary knowledge and skills into the school curriculum, preparing potential sleepers in advance. Some of them might have received additional training in private. To survive, these sleepers would need to put in a valiant effort and also have a bit of luck, but it wasn't improbable. Consequently, they were tense and nervous. And lastly, there was Sunny and the blind girl, the corpses. From the point of view of other sleepers in the hall, their chances of survival were close to zero. How charming! This was how the young sleepers had subconsciously divided themselves. The only exception from this rule was the silver-haired girl who stood alone and apart from everyone, seemingly indifferent to tension and nervousness that permeated the air. She was leaning against a wall with her eyes closed, still listening to music. But regardless of their group and level of training, everyone was already tired of waiting. When will the damn induction ceremony start? Sunny thought, irritated. As though answering his thoughts, a tall man in a dark blue uniform appeared on the stage. Not only was he tall, he was actually almost a giant. Sunny even wondered if the man's mother had sinned with a bear. Of course, it was impossible. Bears had gone extinct long before the spell even appeared. But he once saw pictures in a book, and they looked sort of similar. A bear-like nightmare creature then. The giant man had wide shoulders, an athletic build, and a gorgeous brown beard. His eyes were calm and serious. After reaching the center of the stage, he gave sleepers a long look. When his gaze reached the deserted corner, Sunny suddenly felt nervous. I sure hope he doesn't have a telepathic ability. Otherwise, he might separate me from a limb or two on behalf of his mother. The man didn't pay Sunny a lot of attention and returned his gaze to the front rows of the crowd. Finally, he said in a deep, reverberating voice, "I am Awakened Rock. Sleepers, welcome to the academy." Everyone listened without making a sound. In less than a month, you will be summoned to the dream realm. Some of you might think that you are well prepared. You're wrong. The spell is merciless and cunning. The moment awakened begin to think too much of themselves, they die. I've seen countless sleepers like you lose their lives. I've also seen experienced masters lose theirs. Even saints are not assured to survive. Thanks for the encouragement, Sunny thought sarcastically. In the following 4 weeks, we will do everything in our power to increase your chances of survival. You will receive training from the best instructors in the world. However, don't be misled by their fame. In the end, whether you return from the dream realm alive depends only on one person, you. The responsibility to survive is yours and yours alone. Except for the legacies, sleepers were looking at each other with growing fear in their eyes. Awakened Rock continued. You are not children anymore. It's a shame because you ought to be, but the spell has decided otherwise. You have been to the first nightmare, so you already know what it's like. Your parents, your teachers, and your friends can't help you anymore. Haven't had any of those in a long time. While listening to Rock's speech, Sunny couldn't help but feel a little excluded. It was all old news to him. However, he understood the instructor's purpose. He had to make young sleepers afraid, because fear was the only thing that would keep them alive. Finally, the speech got to the important part. Awakened Rock paused, giving kids listening to him a few moments to digest his words. Then, with a short nod, he continued. Now we will talk about the difference between nightmares and the dream realm. Chapter 23, Dreams and Nightmares. That was something Sunny was keenly interested in. Of course, he had a general knowledge of how things were set inside the spell. But the first nightmare had already shown him that reality was different from how it was portrayed in popular culture in a number of small, but infinitely important ways. He needed to separate truth from the myths. And of course, it was very advantageous to hear it from the mouth of someone who had actually been to the dream realm. So Sunny was all ears. Awakened Rock began to speak. Most people are aware of what nightmares are because they have an impact on the real world and their lives. All of you have been warned before entering the first nightmare that, should you perish there, a nightmare creature would be allowed to cross the threshold and enter reality. Yup, that was the reason why Master Jet had to wait patiently by his side, prepared to deal with the monster if it appears. First nightmares are unique because each of them is individual. That's why only a single creature can appear. However, starting from the second nightmare, things become much more dangerous. These nightmares are not tied to an infected person. Instead, they are born in the dream realm. While the seed of the nightmare is growing, any number of awakened can attempt to conquer it. Hunting down nightmares was the main responsibility of the awakened. Sunny knew that much. Should they all die or fail to find the seed before it matures, a gate will open in the real world, letting through countless monsters. You all know the consequences. Other awakened will be forced to withstand the onslaught on this side, but then there can be massive destruction or losses among the civilian population. Opening gates was something that every person on the planet feared. It was also the second disaster brought upon by the spell after the initial appearance of the nightmare creatures. The main difference was that, in that initial wave, there were only dormant beasts. However, gates had ranks of their own, and any type of creature could potentially step through. Not long before Sunny was born, a rank 5 gate opening left a whole continent uninhabitable. Luckily, high-rank gates were very rare. Awakened Rock's voice grew solemn. So it is not wrong to say that the purpose of the awakened is to enter the dream realm, seek out maturing nightmares, and close them before any harm could befall the real world. From this, you can see that the dream realm and the nightmares are connected, but are not one and the same. If nightmares are the destination, then the dream realm is the road. But it is also so much more. Very romantic. Does Awakened Rock have poetic inclinations? Simply put, the dream realm is a world. It is vast, mysterious, and mostly unexplored. It is also dead. There is no life out there except for the nightmare creatures, corrupted ecosystems, and now us. But it wasn't always dead. We can tell that once, a long time ago, The dream realm was home to several primitive civilizations. There are a lot of ruins buried in its soil. From what Sunny knew, those lost civilizations were not really primitive. It's just that their development was centered around soul cores and mysticism as opposed to technology. So basically, miracles and magic. What were their names? How did they fall? No one knew. Maybe they were destroyed by the spell. We don't know if the dream realm exists inside the spell as one of its illusions, just on an unimaginably larger scale, or if it's real, with the spell only serving as a pathway between two realities. However, we do suspect that the illusions conjured up inside the nightmares are based on its history. They are replicas of past events, somehow reconstructed from the depths of time. So there might have been a real slave caravan on that Black Mountain once, a long time ago. Sunny remembered how time seemed to move in reverse at the beginning of his nightmare. He thought about how things would have ended up without his involvement. Did the nameless temple slave perish in Mountain King's Moor with the rest of the caravan? Somehow he felt that the nameless slave was not that simple. Otherwise, why would the spell remember him? And what about Hero? Was he able to escape? I wonder. There are four main differences between the dream realm and the nightmares. Firstly, it doesn't have a story. There is no predetermined conflict you are forced to resolve. You can move freely and explore, provided that you have the strength to stay alive in the wilderness. Most people tend to stay close to one of the human citadels. That's good to know, Sunny thought, unconvinced. Sure, there were no predetermined conflicts in the dream realm, but with his fated attribute, he was pretty certain to end up in some kind of trouble. So that freedom awakened Rock had mentioned was relative in his case. Meanwhile, the instructor continued. Secondly, as I have already mentioned, there are no people in the dream realm except for those who came from the real world. There are only monsters. Some of them can mimic human appearance, though, so be mindful of that. Sunny felt cold sweat running down his back. Nightmare creatures mimicking humans, so creepy. Since when was that a thing? Why hasn't he ever heard about it? He stole a glance at the legacies standing in the first row and noticed that they did not show any sign of surprise. So they knew. Thirdly, unlike the first nightmare, no nightmare creatures will appear in the real world if you die in the dream realm. It may sound cruel, but that's a good thing. Awakened forces are already spread thin. If we had to monitor every sleeper, we wouldn't have resources to handle more important matters. Considering that each sleeper could spend weeks, sometimes even months in the dream realm, there was ruthless logic in that statement. And lastly, and most importantly, unlike nightmares, which are bound by the rules of fairness, there is no limit to what kind of creature you can meet in the dream realm. During its trials, the spell won't pit a dormant human against an opponent many ranks above them. Oh really? Sunny sneered. However, he was forced to agree with awakened Rock. Even though both Hero and Mountain King were way out of his league, they were still just one rank above him. But in the dream realm, no such restrictions exist. Theoretically, you can stumble upon an unholy titan and die before even realizing what happened. So be careful and stick to the regions with enemies on par with your own rank. It's not an ironclad guarantee, but at least there will be less of a chance of you biting off more than you can chew. Sticking to a region populated by nightmare creatures below his rank was even better. That was exactly what Sunny was planning to do. Awakened Rock paused for a few moments, studying the faces of sleepers in front of him. Then he added, "When the solstice comes, you will be drawn into the dream realm. The exact location of where you will appear can't be predicted in advance, but there is a high chance that many of you will find yourselves in close proximity to each other. Band together and proceed to the nearest human citadel. Each citadel is built around a gateway. Once you reach it, you will be able to return." Gateways were special portals that served as exit points from the dream realm. Once sleepers reached such a portal, they would be able to escape back to reality and become awakened. Their core would evolve, and they would also receive a second aspect ability. After that, they would return to the dream realm each time they fall asleep. If you can't locate or are unable to reach the nearest human citadel, Search for an unclaimed gateway. It will usually be inside or near the most prominent landmark of the region. Work together to defeat its guardians and come back alive. He gave them a heavy look. That is all for today. Next, follow the instructions sent to your communicators to find your assigned dormitory. Once settled, you may proceed to the cafeteria for some late supper. There will be a round of interviews after that to prepare your suggested curriculums. Get a good night's rest. Your training starts tomorrow. With that, he gave them a short nod and left. Sunny sighed. Can't be predicted in advance, huh? With his luck, he would either drop right in the middle of a prosperous human citadel and immediately roll into a gateway, or appear in some region of the dream realm so remote and deadly that no one had ever heard about it or returned from it alive. Let's hope for the former. Since he couldn't do anything about it, Sunny wasn't very worried. There was something much more important on his mind. What exactly do they serve here for supper? Chapter 20, for moving up in the world. Everything having to do with sleepers was situated in the same building. Sunny followed the instructions sent to his communicator and quickly found the dormitories, which were situated on one of the lowest levels. To his surprise, he actually got a whole room to himself. It had a bed with a soft mattress, a table, a dresser, and even a separate bathroom. The materials were new and aesthetically pleasing, the air crisp and sterile. It was warm inside, and the outer wall was equipped with a hidden screen that seamlessly imitated a wide window, opening to a picturesque vista of a snowy park. There were even several sets of clothes, with the Academy emblem provided to him for free. How extravagant, Sunny thought, a little stunned. Rationally, he understood that such an arrangement was not really luxurious. However, to him, who grew up wandering the outskirts, this room was like a palace. He scratched his head. Looks like I've made it. Sunny glanced around, then winked at his shadow and smiled. I guess we're moving up in the world, huh? The shadow didn't respond, apparently not very impressed. Perhaps it didn't care about such things. Right, what would a stupid shadow know? Sunny changed into new clothes and studied himself in the mirror. Then, remembering something, he summoned the runes. He finally had time to study the puppeteer's shroud. Memory, puppeteer's shroud. Memory rank, awakened. Memory type, armor. Memory description, a worm of doubt once found its way into a righteous king's heart. With time, the king was devoured from inside and became its puppet. A lifetime later, the puppeteer worm escaped from the king's dead body, leaving behind a cocoon of black silk. No one knows where it went. However, once people dared to approach the silent castle, they found the silk among the mountains of gnawed bones and fashioned it into an armor. Sunny made a sour face. That is not that terrifying. Yeah, I'm not creeped out at all. Come to think of it, the first creature he killed was called a lava. If he were to assume that Mountain King was a mature puppeteer worm, and already a tyrant, then what the hell would it transform into after becoming a moth? No, it's better not to think about it. With a sigh, he summoned the puppeteer's shroud. Thin black threads immediately appeared around his body and wrapped it into a set of armor. It was made of dark gray, soft fabric with several elements, such as braces and shoulder guards, fashioned out of black, lusterless leather. The armor was light, understated, and did not restrain his movements at all. It also made no sound when he moved, perfect equipment for someone who likes to lurk in the shadows. Sunny smiled. He knew that this armor would be tough to pierce for any creature below the awakened rank, which gave him a great advantage in dealing with all dormant monsters. He also felt a sort of strange, faint calmness while wearing it. A worm of doubt, does it have enhanced protection against mental attacks? Somehow he was sure of it. A great trophy, he wouldn't expect anything less from the memory of a powerful tyrant. The only problem was that the puppeteer's shroud was obviously not meant to be worn on top of a full set of clothes. Quite satisfied, Sunny dismissed it and left his room, heading for the cafeteria. Not bad, he thought, recalling all the rewards he had received during and after the first nightmare. The supper turned out to be as lavish as the dormitory. Sunny's wish to taste real meat finally came true. Not only was it freely available to sleepers, there wasn't even a limit to the amount each of them could eat. More than that, there were rice, bread, various side dishes, sauces, fresh vegetables, fruits, and all kinds of delicious beverages. Extravagant, Sunny thought, steering clear of the coffee. After building a small mountain of food on his plate, he found an empty seat and for a while forgot about the world's existence. As juicy, textured, perfectly seasoned meat filled his mouth, Sunny's vision suddenly was full of stars. He had to hold back an exhilarated moan. And to think he could have lived like that for a whole year. Damn spell, why didn't you infect me a few months ago? He concentrated on the food, decimating the whole plate in no time. Satiated and more than a little gorged, Sunny longingly looked back and thought about getting another serving, but it was already time for his appointment with the academy personnel. Full of regret, he stood up and left the cafeteria. Soon, he found himself in a small office, sitting across from an administrative worker. The worker was very friendly and started the interview right away. Just like Master Jet had warned him, Sunny was offered psychological counseling again. Remembering her advice, he refused, and the interview smoothly switched to questions about his aspect. He didn't want to give up information about his abilities, but also knew that he had to tell the worker something. Luckily, the questions were worded in a way to put sleepers at ease. As such, most of them started with nice and polite preambles like, "Would you like to tell me?" or "If you're willing to share," which gave Sunny an opportunity to give neutral answers. "Would you mind telling me about the type of aspect ability you received, as in combat, sorcery, utility?" He did mind, but had to be careful. I'm not sure. I haven't had time to understand it well." "That's all right. Are you able to directly deal damage with your ability?" "I guess not. Earlier, I wasn't even able to harm a towel." Things went on like that. In the end, Sunny shared just enough information to create an impression that his aspect was weak, harmless, and most likely having something to do with utility. After that, he returned to his room, undressed, and went to sleep. Sunny thought that falling asleep for the first time after the nightmare would be weird, but in fact, it was surprisingly easy. Lying on a soft mattress, with his skin against clean bedsheets and a fluffy pillow under his head, he slept like a baby. Early in the morning, Sunny washed up in his private bathroom and, bursting with energy, hurried to get breakfast in a happy mood. The cafeteria was a bit crowded. After filling his plate with all kinds of delicious stuff, he quickly realized that the only place he could sit was near the blind girl from yesterday. Her table was empty since no one wanted to be close to her. Sunny grimaced. It seemed that the two of them were doomed to be outcasts together for the remaining 4 weeks. He also felt uncomfortable in the company of someone who was practically a dead person, but there wasn't much of a choice. Losing his good mood, he sat at the blind girl's table and gave a perfunctory nod to the social worker who was helping her get around. After that, he tried to pretend that they didn't exist and concentrated on his food. However, before he could finish, a sudden commotion drew his attention. "What's going on?" He looked up and noticed that a lot of sleepers were gathered around the large screen hanging on the wall of the cafeteria, their faces filled with excitement and awe. On the screen, a list of names was displayed, ranking the new batch of sleepers from weakest to strongest, most likely deduced from the results of the interviews. Not particularly interested, he quickly found his own name near the bottom of the list. The only sleeper who the academy judged to be less likely to succeed than him was the blind girl. Turns out, her name was Cassia. But the commotion was a bit too loud to be just the result of the ranking. Curious, he moved his gaze up. The sleepers were restless. How can this be? I'm not seeing things right. What kind of a monster is she?" Castor was placed in second place, and right above him, the portrait of the silver-haired girl could be clearly seen. To the right of it, two simple lines of text were displayed. Name, Nephi's. True name, Changing Star. Chapter 25, Wilderness Survival. So the silver-haired girl, Nephi's, also received a true name in her first nightmare. To get his own, Sunny had to deal with hero and mountain king while possessing a completely useless aspect, an impossible feat that seemed to have pleased the spell very much. I wonder how she had gotten hers. Sleepers in the cafeteria were struck dumb by the revelation of this achievement. They were staring at the screen with astonishment, fear, and admiration. Listening to their excited whispers, Sunny felt a childish desire to scream, "Me too, I have one too." But of course, he kept quiet. Looking around, he noticed Castor's gaze fixed on the screen. There was a strange, somber expression on the humorous young man's face. But the weird thing about it was that, as far as Sunny could tell, Castor wasn't looking at the line of text containing the true name. Instead, he was staring at the line of text that read, Nephi's, as though the girl's actual name held more meaning to him than the one given by the spell. Interesting, do they know each other? Why would a lofty legacy know someone who came to the academy in a police-issued tracksuit? And speaking of Nephi's, where was she? Sunny glanced around the cafeteria and quickly noticed the silver-haired girl who was sitting quietly in a corner with a cup of coffee in her hands. She wasn't paying a lot of attention to the commotion, seemingly immersed in her thoughts. Her gray eyes were serious and distant. A sleeper with a true name, that's impossible. It's technically possible. Smile of Heaven received her true name in the first nightmare, I think. But yeah, I'm doubtful. Maybe she lied in the interview. Are you stupid? If it was that easy to deceive the administrators, the crazy pervert from yesterday would have been in the first place instead. Sunny's face twitched. Crazy pervert, huh? Well, why don't we just ask her? Suddenly, there was a deafening silence in the cafeteria. Following the suggestion, sleepers stopped talking and turned around, staring at Nephi's. However, no one seemed to have the courage to approach her first. Finally sensing something, she raised her eyes and looked at them with surprise. What? Even the blind girl, Cassia, turned in the direction of her voice. After a couple of moments, Castor suddenly walked over and made a small bow. Lady Nephi's, I am Castor from the Han Li clan. I see that your trial went well. Lady, why is he addressing her that way? And he had to introduce himself, so they don't know each other. Interesting. Nephi's seemed to be a little bit perplexed by the question. After thinking for a while, she smiled brightly and shrugged. It is what it is. Castor awkwardly returned the smile. I see, I am very glad that you returned unharmed. Not that I doubted your abilities. Nephi's nodded. Thank you. After that, she returned to her coffee, indicating that the conversation was over or simply oblivious to everyone's attention. Sunny sighed. How mysterious. There were a lot of thoughts on his mind. However, none of them could distract him from the most important thing, breakfast. A few seconds later, he had forgotten all about the awkward dynamic between Castor and Nephi's and was happily shoveling down his food. The wilderness survival classroom was spacious, tastefully decorated, and completely empty. Sunny even thought that he was mistaken, but then spotted a gloomy instructor sitting behind a wide wooden desk. Noticing him, the instructor perked up. Come in, young man. He was a lively old man with messy gray hair, absent-minded eyes, and a pair of bushy eyebrows that seemed to jump around on their own. I'm awakened, Julius. You can call me Teacher Julius. Sit down, what's your name? Sunny obediently sat down. It's Sunless. Julius raised his eyebrows. Ah, what an ominous name, but that is good, very good. After all, we have to deal with a lot of ominous things. Sunny carefully looked around. I'm sorry, teacher. Did I come too early? No, you're right on time. Are other students late? The instructor grunted with incredible contempt. No one else is coming. Those brutes are only interested in swinging their fists and swords around. Very few are smart like you and know the true value of knowledge. Oh, so it was that unpopular. Sunny inwardly sighed, hoping that he won't regret the decision to abandon combat training in favor of this course. Say, young man, why did you choose wilderness survival of all things? There was no point in hiding the true reason, not that Sunny would have been able to anyway. The awakened that monitored me during the first nightmare, Master Jet, had advised me to study it above all things. A very wise advice, that Master truly knows what's important. Wait, did you say Jet? His eyes widened. Soul Reaper Jet, that murderous savage, HM, who would have thought that a barbarian like her would know the value of intricate knowledge. Soul Reaper, Sunny's curiosity was piqued. Teacher, do you know Master Jet? Julius carefully looked behind his back before answering. Who doesn't know the Soul Reaper? She might not be the most powerful awakened out there, but she is certainly one of the most feared. That's because her aspect abilities disregard flesh and target soul cores directly, which means that no amount of armor, damage resistance, and physical protection can stop them. He leaned forward. The only good thing is that she's young and not likely to become a saint anytime soon or even ever. Yes, luckily, there's a very low probability that she'll ever advance. Sunny blinked. Why? Julius looked at him as though trying to comprehend how someone could be so ignorant. Because of her problematic personality, of course. Who would want to help a psychopathic killer become a saint? You need a team of outstanding companions and a lot of support to attempt conquering the third nightmare. Soul Reaper Jet isn't. Wait. Suddenly, Julius frowned and leaned back. Why am I gossiping with you? You're too young to know such things. More than that, it's not in my character to badmouth others behind their backs. I would beg to differ, Sunny thought sarcastically, but didn't say anything out loud. He already got a lot of juicy information out of Teacher Julius. Maybe choosing wilderness survival was the right choice after all. Let's get back to your curriculum. What other courses are you taking? Sunny sighed. None. For the next 4 weeks, I'll be fully concentrated on wilderness survival. Julius stared at him for a whole minute, an expression of utter astonishment written clearly on his face. Then, slowly, an excited gleam appeared in his eyes. Finally, he grinned. Wonderful, this is wonderful. You're such an astute young man, don't you worry. In 4 whole weeks, I will make you immortal. Sunny's lessons with Teacher Julius started pleasantly and without much tension, but just an hour later, he felt like his head was ready to explode. There was so much new information, and all of it was so strange and counterintuitive for someone who had never left the walled-off, sheltered confines of the city. From time to time, Julius gaped at Sunny's lack of knowledge and relevant experience. However, he had a good attitude and an endless enthusiasm for teaching. Whenever Sunny stumbled, he would patiently slow down and allow his student to catch up. The curriculum that Julius planned out was practically insane. There was an endless amount of theoretical knowledge to learn, practical lessons both in virtual reality and the real world, numerous subjects and weird things to study. There were even several lessons dedicated exclusively to learning the basics of several dead languages of the dream realm. Why would I need to learn new languages? Sunny thought with self-pity. The spell automatically translates everything. But Julius was uncompromising. The spell is not a translator. Do you think it has the time to express the intricacies of human speech? Let's say you're seeking shelter in a ruin and find an inscription that reads, "Certain death ahead." There are 30 words for death in the rune language. Just by knowing the runes, you'll be able to deduce what kind of danger there is. On the first day, they studied until the sun was about to set. Only then did Julius decide to let Sunny go. Mentally exhausted and lamenting the fact that he had to miss lunch and dinner, Sunny decided to gently remind his teacher about the importance of food for maintaining high levels of concentration tomorrow. After returning to his room, he fell on a chair and stared blankly into the distance for a while. Then, as though remembering something, Sunny turned to his shadow. Right, he had a lot to accomplish before supper. He observed the shadow for a few seconds and then grinned. Let's see what you can really do. Chapter 26, Changing Star. Sunny was pretty sure that his shadow was capable of much more than just being a silent follower. After all, the spell had described it as being an invaluable helper. It was now up to him to find out how exactly shadow control could be of help. As in many other matters having to do with aspects, there was a certain level of instinctual understanding buried deep inside his subconscious. This understanding was either given to him by the spell or was something innate to every awakened. Sunny just had to sense the subconscious knowledge and learn how to put it into practice. Once again, he concentrated on sensing his body and spirit, then commanded the shadow to perform a series of simple motions. With each of them, he was growing more and more familiar with the feeling of controlling the shadow. Pretty soon, it was as natural to him as breathing and walking. The shadow felt like a part of his body. Satisfied with this initial result, Sunny carefully gave it a new command. Without pause, the shadow separated itself from the soles of his shoes, walked to the other end of the room and turned around, staring at him in slightly mocking silence. Sunny was left without a shadow. This is not scientific at all, he thought with an amused smile. Science never really applied to anything having to do with the spell, after all. As the shadow walked away, he felt a very weird split happening in his mind. It was like his perception had separated into two distinct sources. One was his body, the other, his shadow. With a bit of trying, he managed to focus on the second source. Instantly, his vision blurred. "Whoa," Sunny blurted, surprised. "Whoa," the shadow heard from the other end of the room. Sunny blinked. In his mind, there now existed two pictures. One was of his room's door, with an indifferent shadow standing in front of it. The other was of a pale young man sitting on a chair, wide-eyed and bewildered. "That's me." He raised an arm and waved it in the air. Simultaneously, the pale young man raised and waved his. "I can perceive the world through my shadow." He sat for a while, thinking. An ability like that opened up a lot of possibilities. With his child of shadows, attribute allowing him to see and move stealthily in the darkness and shadow control, allowing him to send out a sneaky shadow as a scout, he was pretty much a perfect spy. A spy was someone who gathered information without exposing themselves to a lot of risk. A role like that suited Sunny's taste very much. Of course, spies were also able to strike from the shadows with deadly precision. Armed with information, they were masterful ambushers. With the prior knowledge of the opponent's weaknesses, their attacks were surgical and lethal. But any direct confrontation would mean putting himself in danger, so Sunny wasn't very keen on becoming an assassin. After all, his aspect still lacked the means of directly enhancing his combat performance. "Shall we test it?" He looked at the shadow and gave it a command. With an exaggerated sigh, the shadow bent down and nimbly slid under the door. Instantly, he could see both the room and the hallway outside. Sunny closed his eyes to focus on the picture projected from the shadow. Moving stealthily from one shadow to another, it glided down the hallway. With a bit of timing and consideration, his scout was practically invisible. Sunny passed by a couple of sleepers and listened in on their conversation. Not finding it very interesting, he continued forward. Finally, the shadow stopped at a corner. To its left were the elevators, to its right, the way to the girls' dormitory. All sorts of provocative images immediately entered Sunny's head. "Oh my," he thought, blushing. Yes, with this ability, it was also very easy to fall into utter depravity. But no, he couldn't do it. Not because of some high moral principles. It's just that, with his reputation of a pervert, the chances of being asked if he had done something unbecoming were pretty high. So he needed the ability to honestly answer no. So I probably shouldn't, right? Right. Of course you're right, don't even think about it. Back in his room, Sonny sighed with a lot of regret. Then he directed his scout to hide in the shadow of a passing sleeper and followed him to the elevators. Sometime later, Sonny's shadow was hiding in a corner of a large dojo. He was observing his fellow sleepers who, under the guidance of Instructor Rock, were going through the motions of the introductory combat class. Today was mainly dedicated to testing their general competency and abilities. After that, the sleepers were going to be separated into groups based on their level, such as novice, advanced, or expert, as well as their weapon of choice. Some would be assigned a personal tutor or paired together. Currently, sleepers were taking turns delivering their strongest punches to a wide plate attached to a special measuring machine. After each strike, the machine would display a number corresponding to the sleeper's physical strength. In theory, a machine like that was not hard to build. However, considering that many of sleepers had combat-oriented aspects that enhanced their might in a variety of ways, it was actually a marvel of engineering and durability. Their technique and training also affected the final result. Most people were getting numbers ranging from 10 to 14. It was considered a good result, something that only the most athletic people could reach. However, a lot of sleepers, obviously those with enhancing aspects, were able to achieve a score of 15 or even 16. I would probably get 10 or 11, Sonny thought, feeling a little bored. Then he suddenly perked up, noticing that it was turn for Nephi's, the highest-rated sleeper of their batch, to strike the plate. The slender girl approached the machine and, without much preparation, delivered a sudden, crushing blow. Sonny wasn't very well versed in martial arts, but even he was impressed by the flawless economy and speed of her execution. She had a lot of training. Nephi's was becoming more and more intriguing. What's her actual background? After a short pause, the machine displayed the result. 16. Sonny felt a bit disappointed. Not that impressive, I was expecting more. She was the proud bearer of a true name, after all. After that, only Caster remained. This time, Sonny couldn't even see the flying fist, it was just too fast. The machine trembled and took more time calculating. Finally, two numbers appeared. 21. Everyone gaped at the display, stunned. More than a few admiring looks were thrown at Caster, who simply bowed and took a step back. Instructor Rock smiled. Not bad. Now, we will move to sparring and evaluate your general level of training. I need 2 volunteers to begin. Nephi's was the first to step forward and walk to the center of the ring. A couple of seconds later, a tall and extremely muscular sleeper followed and faced her. The rules are simple. Make your opponent's back touch the floor or throw them out of the ring. Use whatever abilities and techniques you find appropriate. Oh, the show is starting. Watching sleepers fight each other was not only entertaining, but could also provide Sonny with knowledge of their powers. Back in the room, he leaned forward and rested his chin on his palms. Go Nephi's! The tall guy attacked without wasting any time. His muscles bulged, threatening to tear the soft fabric of his white dobok. He advanced like an unstoppable mountain, sending a vicious kick flying. A second later, he was lying on the floor with a dumbstruck look on his face. Nephi's didn't even change her stance. Instructor Rock gave her a cheerful look and grinned. Next! What followed could only be described as a massacre. One after another, Nephi's managed to defeat almost every single sleeper present in the dojo. She didn't seem to be faster or stronger than them, but each time someone entered the ring to fight her, they would inevitably end up beaten and thrown to the ground. Sonny watched the process with a growing sense of amusement. However, at some point, even he felt a bit of unease. Nephi's moved with the calm precision of a battle machine. Her technique was clean, graceful, and ruthless. No matter what type of attack was thrown at her, she was able to either predict or instantly react to it, then deflect and turn it against the attacker with the minimum amount of effort. It didn't matter whether her opponent was poor, rich, or a legacy. Everyone would end up dealt with in a matter of seconds. What's more, through the whole process, the composed expression on her face didn't even change once. It was like Nephis was made out of metal. Is she even human? Sunny thought, suddenly apprehensive. What was he going to do if this changing star were to end up as his enemy? The best course of action would be to run away, or better yet, try not to antagonize her to begin with. After all, the sun was also a star, and shadows didn't mix well with sunlight. Finally, Castor was the last one remaining, once again. However, he didn't seem to be perturbed by the miserable failure of every other sleeper. With a soft smile on his lips, the young man stepped into the ring. Castor and Nephis faced each other. Their eyes locked for a few seconds, and then Castor slightly bowed. "Lady Nephis, please excuse me in advance." "What is he going to?" A moment later, Sunny opened his eyes in shock. Chapter 27, Measure of Power. It seemed like Castor suddenly ceased to exist. However, it was only an illusion. The truth was that he was just moving so fast that the human eye wasn't able to keep up with his movements. If it wasn't for the special properties of shadow sight, Sunny wouldn't have been able to perceive anything either. Even then, he only noticed a hazy blur streaking through the air. In a fraction of a second, Castor covered the distance between him and Nephis and delivered a devastating blow. However, despite his astonishing speed, she somehow managed to react in time, slightly turning her body to deflect the strike. But it still wasn't enough. Although Nephis had managed to avoid being hit squarely in her center of gravity, Castor's fist ended up connecting with her shoulder, sending the girl into a spin. Not wasting any time, Castor disappeared again. His plan was very simple. While Nephis was still under the impression that the enemy was in front of her, he was going to use his unnatural swiftness to circle around and attack from the back. The young man appeared behind the oblivious girl, ready to finish the fight with one decisive strike. Just as he planned, she seemed to be preparing to attack in the direction he had been seen just a split second ago. Gratified, Castor shifted his weight, putting it all into his fist. However, at the last moment, Nephis suddenly changed her stance and threw her elbow back with frightening force. Castor's eye widened. It was all a feint. And now that he had committed to a strike, there was no simple way to stop. No matter how fast he was still subject to the laws of inertia. The elbow was approaching his face with a profound feeling of inevitability. And yet, Castor still managed to avoid it, even if it was just by a hair's breadth. His speed advantage was just too big. He then proceeded to trip and push Nephis, sending her flying to the ground. However, just before she was about to hit the mats, the young man carefully grabbed the collar of her dobok and gently pulled, slowing down the fall and allowing Nephis to land on the floor without any impact. Lying on her back, the girl blinked a couple of times and looked up at him. The whole altercation lasted no more than 2 seconds. Back in his room, Sunny opened his eyes in shock. "So that's an ascended aspect. That's cheating." A sleeper had no business being that fast. The powers bestowed upon them by the spell were supposed to be in their infancy, but Castor was a legacy after all. Who knew how many soul shards were fed to him prior to enrolling into the academy? Back in the dojo, Instructor Rock grunted and gave Castor a nod. Nephis slowly rose to her feet. The rest of the sleepers were gawking at the young man with reverence, whispering among each other in hushed tones. It seemed that his performance left them with a deep impression. However, Castor himself wasn't very elated. He glanced at Nephis with an unreadable expression. That was because, unlike the rest of them, he came to a certain realization. The truth of the matter was known only to him, Nephis, Instructor Rock, and Sunny, who was very observant and quickly picked up on such things. The thing that sleepers failed to notice was that Nephis did not use her aspect ability when facing Castor. In fact, she had not used it at any point during today's testing. No one even knew what her ability was. And yet, despite his powerful aspect, Caster barely managed to clutch a victory against her. What a monster, Sunny thought, full of unease. The shadow hiding in the corner of the dojo seemed to agree with him wholeheartedly. After that, the introductory combat class was over. Sore from the beating they received, sleepers headed for the showers. Sunny waited for a bit and then directed his shadow to sneak into the boys' locker room. He wasn't very interested in watching a bunch of teenagers changing clothes, but there was a slight possibility that Caster would either comment on his duel with Nephi's or answer some questions about his incredible aspect ability. Just as he had expected, the young man was surrounded by a group of newly converted fans. They were congratulating him on his victory, full of adoration and excitement. However, Caster himself seemed to be in a bad mood. His expression was somber, and there was a grim heaviness in his eyes. In fact, his face grew darker with each praise he received. Caster, that was incredible. Your aspect is overpowered, am I right? That Nephi's girl stood no chance at all. True name, who needs that? She's just a wannabe. Finally, Caster raised his head and pierced the last boy who had spoken with a cold look. That boy, just like him, was one of the few legacies in their batch of sleepers. He frowned, surprised by Caster's reaction. What is it? Caster gritted his teeth. I might have expected such behavior from them, but you should know better. The other legacy raised an eyebrow. Why is there something special about that peasant girl? Caster's eyes widened. Peasant girl, do you really not know who she is? No, Sunny thought impatiently, so just get to it and say it out loud. Luckily, the arrogant sleeper had the same sentiment. Caster opened his mouth several times as though not sure what to say. Finally, he shook his head and answered. She is Nephi's of the Immortal Flame clan. As soon as he said that, the arrogant legacy became deathly pale. Not paying him any attention, Caster continued. I trust that I don't need to tell you about her grandfather. Her parents were Smile of Heaven and Broken Sword. In his room, Sunny almost fell from the chair. Even he knew who Immortal Flame and Broken Sword were. The former was the first human to conquer the second nightmare and become a master. The latter, the first one to conquer the third nightmare and become a saint. They, as well as their companions, were among the most famous heroes of the human race, someone who had managed to change history with their own two hands. If what Caster said was true, then Nephi's wasn't just an aristocrat, she was royalty. No wonder he addressed her as Lady. Why didn't he just call her Princess instead? But that didn't make any sense. Echoing his thoughts, the pale-faced sleeper asked in trembling voice. Then why is she so? Caster sighed. Because they're all dead, the Immortal Flame clan is long gone. For a few moments, the locker room was completely silent. Caster looked down. She's the only one left. Late at night, when everyone was already asleep, Sunny furtively entered the dojo. Looking around, he made sure that no one was there and then curiously approached the ring where Nephi's and others had been tested earlier. He stopped at the center of the ring and stood there for a while, remembering how she had dealt with dozens of sleepers of their batch before being defeated by Caster. Monsters, both of them are monsters, he mumbled, bitter and disheartened. Shaking his head, Sunny left the ring and then he looked at his shadow. Do you agree? The shadow hesitated for a few seconds, then stuck out its chest and crossed its arms, trying to appear cocky, disdainful, and unperturbed. However, its act wasn't very convincing. Yeah, you're right, exactly. What's the big deal anyway? Both Immortal Flame and Broken Sword, Nephi's father and grandfather, were as monstrous in terms of power as one can get, but they still failed to protect their family from being eviscerated. So, power wasn't that important in the end. Even royalty was not safe from the cruelty of the world. Sunny sighed and proceeded to the measuring machine. Making a fist, he swung it and delivered his best punch. The machine hummed for a few seconds and then displayed a single number. 9. Oh, come on, I deserve a 10 at least. Feeling very indignant, he struck the plate again, almost hurting his fingers. However, the result was the same. Damn it! Sonny paced for a bit, trying to control his anger. It seems he was destined to be a weakling. After all, the force of the strike depended on mass and acceleration. Acceleration could be improved with technique and exercise, but mass was something he had little control of. He was already done growing, and his height was not going to drastically increase in the future. No matter how hard Sonny trained, he was always going to be a lightweight. How is this fair? Suddenly filled with resentment, he punched the plate again, putting all of his frustration into this one strike. At that moment, a strange instinct suddenly awakened in Sonny's mind. Following the command of this instinct, his shadow flowed up and wrapped itself around his hand, sticking to it like a black glove. In the next moment, the punch connected. The machine trembled from the force of the strike. Sonny's yelped in pain and took a step back, cradling his bruised fist. After a while, the result was displayed. However, it wasn't a 9 anymore. It wasn't even a 10. It was 18. He looked at the displayed number for a long time, expressionless. Then a wide grin slowly appeared on Sonny's face. I see, so that why, of course. He clenched his fist again, looking down at the black, shadowy glove. Ah, what an invaluable helper indeed. Now we are talking. Chapter 20, 8 Training Montage. Days flew by. Sonny only had 4 weeks to prepare himself for the journey into the dream realm, so there wasn't even a minute to spare. He was relentless, pushing his body and mind to the limits in an attempt to absorb as much knowledge and skills as possible in that short amount of time. In the day, he studied with teacher Julius, slowly learning how to survive and take care of himself in the absence of civilization. Their lessons ranged from comparatively simple, like various ways to produce fire, to much more obscure and esoteric, like celestial navigation. What was so hard about celestial navigation? Well, as it turned out, the dream realm was not consistent in terms of star geography. Different regions had different stars and constellations, as well as a different number of moons. While the sun seemed to be the same, its behavior was highly unpredictable. Still, with sufficient knowledge, one could find ways to study the skis and subsequently navigate themselves. Most of these lessons were, supposedly, already included in the various school curriculums and known to the majority of sleepers. However, learning something from a textbook and learning the same thing from an actual awakened were two completely different matters. Teacher Julius had a habit of going much more in-depth when explaining his subject. Thanks to this time-consuming habit of his, Sonny not only learned about the what, but also often gained glimpses into the why. This nascent understanding of the underlying principles of the dream realm environments gave him the ability to face any situation with at least some measure of readiness. Even the lessons in dead languages, which Sonny had initially judged to be useless, turned out to be much more interesting than he could ever imagine. This was, in large part, because it concerned the spell itself. After all, the spell communicated with humans in one of those dead languages. By knowing the language, he was able to understand its various remarks and descriptions better. The simplest example of this was Nephai's and her true name, changing star, while technically correct. This translation failed to properly convey the exact meaning. By understanding the grammatical structure of the rune language, it was easy to extrapolate and see that the more correct translation would have been Star of Change. More than that, there were different runes for change, each with its own connotation. Depending on what exact rune was used to relay the meaning of the name, it could also mean ruinous star or star of misfortune. A small change in wording and connotation could mean a world of difference in real life. Sonny, who had never seriously studied before, found the process of acquiring vast amounts of theoretical knowledge strange, numbing, and exhausting. However, in a sense, it was also exhilarating. After all, knowledge was something that only the privileged had access to. It was also this authority over knowledge that kept them in the position of power, creating a vicious circle of inequality. The poor had no opportunity to study, and without the advantage of good education, they had no way to stop being poor. The weirdest part about all of this was that Sonny was now one of those privileged people. More than that, he was at the pinnacle of social hierarchy. Not only had he gained access to an unlimited amount of knowledge, but even his basic needs like food and shelter were also taken care of by the government, allowing him to fully focus on the single goal of developing himself as an awakened. This sudden transformation would have sent him into a whirlpool of philosophical reflection if he had any time to spare. But he didn't, because teacher Julius also insisted on holding practical lessons every other day. Even if some of them had to be done in virtual reality simulations, he insisted on using the full immersion stations with enhanced physical feedback. As a result, Sonny was bone-tired and utterly exhausted. The good thing was that with such amount of exercise, coupled with his newly reforged body, Sonny had never been in better shape. Even without combat training, he could feel his strength, stamina, and agility improving by leaps and bounds. Basically, the peculiar rebirth he had experienced after completing the first nightmare had enhanced the innate potential of his body, bringing it to the peak of the human condition. However, it was up to him to realize that potential with sweat, effort, and a lot of hard work. Practical application of wilderness survival techniques provided him with the opportunity to do so. And as though this wasn't enough, Sonny secretly collected information about other sleepers and practiced shadow control every night. His shadow was independent enough to be sent on scouting missions without his direct control. It would sneak here and there, listening in on the conversations and observing different classes where sleepers had to demonstrate their aspect abilities. Then, after Sonny had finished his supper and returned to his room, it would come back and share everything it had heard and seen during the day. The only problem with this arrangement was that the shadow, despite its outward snarkiness, turned out to be rather naive. It didn't quite understand how the human world worked, and as such, often failed to distinguish between useful information and meaningless chatter. So most of the time, Sonny would receive nothing of value or juicy gossip instead of important secrets. This is how he learned that in the sleeper center, romance was in the air. After all, there were 100 beautiful young people locked underground in close proximity to each other, with the added spice of a deathly threat hanging above their heads. Many felt that life was short, and it was their time to seize the day. Passion bloomed in the shadow of approaching danger. Sonny was excluded from this whole side of the thing, of course. Firstly, he had already positioned himself to be perceived as an unlikable lunatic. Secondly, he simply had no time for anything except for his lessons and training. And lastly, he was wary of getting too close to anybody, afraid that a situation would arise where he would have no choice but to divulge his true name. Apart from gathering information and slowly learning about the scope and details of various aspect abilities, and to a lesser extent, flaws, he was also experimenting with shadow control. The results were very promising. He quickly found out that his shadow was able to enhance various objects and not only his body. If it wrapped itself around a weapon, the weapon strike harder and deliver more damage. If it was applied to an armor, the armor would become sturdier and harder to break. The enhancement was rather substantial too. It was roughly twice as much as the initial value. All in all, this ability, if used correctly, could make him a powerhouse among the sleepers. Many combat aspects could deliver more speed or damage, many could provide more defense and protection, but none were as well-rounded and versatile as Shadow Slave. With the added utility of Shadow Sight, Shadow Step, and Shadow Scout, it was truly incredible. Just like that, day after day passed, slowly turning into weeks. Before Sonny even knew it, the winter solstice was already here. Chapter 29, The Last Day on Earth. On the day of the winter solstice, Sonny woke up feeling tired and drowsy. No matter how much he tried to shake off this listlessness, it wouldn't go away. In the end, he just stayed in the bed for a while, wrapping himself in a blanket. He was already familiar with this feeling of never-ending, ensnaring sleepiness. It was the same in the days before his first nightmare. It was also quite similar to what he had experienced while slowly dying of hypothermia on the slopes of the Black Mountain. Remembering the cold embrace of approaching death, Sonny couldn't help but shiver. This was his last day on Earth, at least for a while. By nightfall, the spell was going to take him away once again, this time to challenge the vast expanse of the dream realm. What was he going to face in that ruined magical world? Would luck be on his side this time, or would there be another disaster? Ugh. There was no point in guessing. He had already done everything in his power to prepare for the inevitable. He studied hard, trained hard, and kept his secret safe. His aspect was better than most, and his will to survive was long tempered by the harsh reality of the outskirts and the even harsher ordeal of the first nightmare. All in all, he was ready. With a sigh, Sonny got out of bed and went along with his morning routine. If this was going to be his last hot shower in a long while, he was going to really enjoy it. If it was going to be his last scrumptious breakfast for the time being. Actually, he had no appetite. The cafeteria was full of sleepers, but no one was talking. Everybody was in low spirits and seemed to be uncharacteristically introspective. There was no usual laughter or boisterous conversations, only the legacies remained calm and collected. However, even they kept to themselves. Sonny thought about the last time he was preparing to enter the spell and with a bit of trepidation approached the coffee machine. During his stay in the academy, he had long discovered that a lot of people were in a habit of adding sugar and milk to their coffee. So, on this auspicious day, he decided to give it another try. After all, it was nice to have a tradition. A few minutes later, he had taken his usual seat near Cassia, the blind girl. Despite their compulsory closeness, they had not talked to each other even once, just like two strangers forced to share the same space by circumstances beyond their control. Sonny did not see a reason for anything to change today. However, as soon as he took the first sip of coffee, Cassia suddenly turned her head and stared at him with her beautiful, blind blue eyes. Unnerved, Sonny looked around, checking if someone else had attracted her attention, and after making sure that there wasn't anyone standing behind him, asked, What? Cassia was silent, as though hesitating if she should reply, and then suddenly said, Happy birthday. What? Sonny frowned, trying to comprehend the meaning behind her words. Then, a flash of surprise appeared on his face. Oh right, it's my birthday today. He had completely forgotten about it. He was turning 17 today. Wait, how did she know about this? Sonny gave the blind girl a strange look, opened his mouth, and then decided to let the issue go. She was just too creepy. Oh, thanks. With a nod, Cassia turned away and seemingly lost interest in having a conversation once again. Which was for the better. Sonny returned to his coffee, finding it not too bad this time. Of course, sugar and cream were making most of the work. However, he did feel a little bit more awake after drinking it. 17, huh? Sonny was never sure that he would make it to this age alive, and yet, despite everything he did, life was sure unpredictable sometimes. If anyone would have told him a year ago that he was going to celebrate his 17th birthday by drinking real coffee with real milk and sugar, he would have laughed in their face. But now, it was a reality. Unwillingly, Sonny remembered all the people who used to celebrate his birthdays with him a long time ago. Before his mood turned sour, he decisively dispelled these thoughts and forced himself to smile. This is not bad. Let's do it again next year when I'm already an awakened. Cheering himself up like that, he finished his coffee and left the cafeteria. There were no classes today, but he still visited the wilderness survival classroom and said his goodbyes to teacher Julius. The old man got pretty emotional when sending him off. He gave Sunny one last tip, a dozen or so times in a row, and even promised to apply for a research assistant position to be opened after the young man had become a full awakened. Sunny left, thanking him for his time and patience. After that, there wasn't much to do. When the sun was close to setting, Instructor Rock gathered them in the foyer of the Sleeper Center and led them outside. In the snowy parks that surrounded the white building, other awakened were leading their own batches of sleepers to the same destination. It was the Academy's medical center. The center looked more like a shrine than a hospital. Its interior contained both highly advanced technology as well as some of the best healers among the awakened. For the duration of their first journey into the dream realm, the bodies of sleepers would be kept safe in specially designed pods and sustained by the magical powers of those healers if anything unfortunate were to happen on the other side of the spell. Of course, whether or not they would wake up in the end wholly depended on the sleepers themselves. To Sunny's surprise, after entering the medical center, Instructor Rock did not take them directly to the wing containing sleeper pods. Instead, he led them to a comparatively deserted floor and then opened the doors to a spacious gallery that was brightly illuminated by the beautiful crimson rays of the setting sun. There they saw rows and rows of wheelchairs. In each wheelchair, there was a person with a blank, strangely peaceful expression on their face. All these people were completely silent, motionless, and still. They did not show any reaction to the appearance of guests. They all seemed to be empty. In the eerie silence, Sunny felt his hair standing up and a creeping terror sipping deep into his heart. Instructor Rock looked at the empty people with solemn eyes. "There is a reason I brought you all here. Look well and remember. Some of you may know who these people are. For those of you who don't, they are called Hollow." He gritted his teeth. Each one of them was once either a sleeper or an awakened. Some of them were weak, some of them were strong, some were even incredibly powerful. All of them have perished in the dream realm. There their souls are gone, Sunny realized, horrified. If you're lucky, once your spirit is destroyed, your body dies with it. But if not, you'll become just like them, Hollow. Instructor Rock glanced in the direction where Castor and Nephi stood, and then added, "So don't die out there." Half an hour later, sleepers had been led to their personal rooms and were preparing to enter the pods. In one of the rooms, the blind girl, Cassia, was helplessly trying to orient herself in the unfamiliar space, touching the walls and strange pieces of machinery with her hands. Tears were streaming down her beautiful, doll-like face. In the other room, Proud Legacy Castor was staring listlessly at the floor. His lips were moving, repeating one strange phrase over and over again. He was trembling. Somewhere else, Changing Star Nephi's, the last daughter of the Immortal Flame clan, was looking down at her hands. Underneath her skin, soft white radiance was slowly growing brighter and brighter. Her face was contorted in a grimace of harrowing agony. And finally, there was a room where Shadow Slave Sunless, lost from light, turned away from the sleeping pod and glanced down at his shadow. "Well, are you ready?" The shadow shrugged and didn't answer. Sunny sighed. "Yeah, me too." With that, he stepped forward and climbed into the pod. In the vast, echoing darkness, he heard, "Welcome to the Dream Realm, Sunless." Chapter 30, Starless Void. Sunny was expecting to first look at the place where his arrival to the Dream Realm was going to take place from above, just like it had happened at the beginning of the first nightmare. Back then, time had magically moved in reverse, giving him an opportunity to see hints of what he was going to face. Instead, immediately after hearing the greetings of the spell, Sunny found himself blind and drowning. As he instinctively tried to open his mouth to scream, salty water rushed inside, making him choke and twitch. More than that, he couldn't see anything. No, it's not that he couldn't see, it's just there was no source of light around. Usually, darkness wasn't a problem for Sunny, but for some reason, his sight wasn't working anymore. Maybe the seawater he was submerged in was blocking it. If it wasn't for the special space perception that the affinity to shadows gave him, he would have been completely disoriented. With its help, though, he barely managed to understand which side was down and which side was up. Luckily, teacher Julius's lessons had included swimming. Swearing to thank both the old man and master, yet once he came back, Sonny forced himself to stay calm and began to swim upward. In a few long and tense seconds, his head broke through the surface of the water. Sonny was finally able to draw in a deep, hoarse breath. "Breathe, breathe, you're still alive." After sucking in enough air to soothe his burning lungs and compose himself to a certain degree, Sonny carefully spun in the water, trying to take in his surroundings. What met him was an endless, jet-black expanse of undulating waves. Above them was an empty black sky. There was no moon, no stars, just a dark vastness of repressive nothingness. Sonny blinked a few times, cold dread taking hold of his heart. This is a sea, an ocean. Was I dropped in the middle of an ocean? No, it couldn't be. There had to be solid ground somewhere nearby. As he was gripped by a momentary panic, a remote sound suddenly drew his attention. Sonny turned around and saw a triangular dorsal fin moving in his direction. Luckily, it was still hundreds and hundreds of meters away. Wait, if it's so far away, then how come I can see it so clearly? Despite being submerged in water, Sonny still felt like there was suddenly cold sweat all over his body. By his estimation, that dorsal fin was at least 5 meters tall. It was rapidly approaching, growing visibly larger with each second. Damn you, spell! With eyes full of horror, Sonny spun again, desperately trying to find something, anything, to save him. And there, a short distance away, he finally noticed a black mass protruding slightly above the water. Not wasting even a second on thinking, he started to swing his arms and legs, swimming in the direction of the black mass with a considerable speed. However, no matter how fast he swam, the giant shadow of the unknown creature was closing the distance between them much faster. A small part of Sonny's mind managed to preserve its rationality even when faced with this boundless, primal fear. Not allowing himself to slip entirely into panic, Sonny tried to think, and then silently commanded his own shadow to wrap itself around his body. Instantly, his speed increased twofold. Just seconds before the unknown colossus got to him, Sonny reached the black mass, stretched out his hands, and pulled himself out of the water. He rolled away from the edge, scratching his skin on the uneven rocks, and jumped in fright when the whole surface underneath him shuddered, as though something massive had collided with it. As Sonny backed out, terrifying jaws appeared from the water, with rows and rows of giant teeth, each one as long as he was tall. He opened his eyes wide, understanding that the rock he had climbed on was not tall enough to save him from the monster. Why is it even trying to eat me? I'm too small to be considered a filling snack for something this enormous. However, before the monster had a chance to attack, a colossal tentacle suddenly broke through the water and rose into the air like some strange, black tower. Before too long, it fell down, entangling the owner of the giant maw and pulling it back under the water. Sonny lost the feeling in his legs and plopped on the ground, his mouth opened, his whole body was shaking. A few seconds later, the dark sea was calm again, as though nothing has happened. The indifferent waves continued to move silently under the lightless sky. So it wasn't trying to eat me, he realized, frozen. It was trying to run away. A few minutes later, Sonny was pretty sure that nothing was going to devour him, at least not immediately. With that certainty, he was finally in a state of mind to stop trembling and explore his surroundings a little. The black mass he climbed onto turned out to be a single stone platform of around 12 meters in diameter. Its surface was mostly flat, covered with grooves and somewhat dry. Due to the regular shape of its edges, it seemed more like something man-made than a natural formation. But then again, here in the dream realm, it was hard to be sure that something man-made was actually made by humans as opposed to. Better not to think about it. The platform wasn't connected to anything, existing as a tiny island in the sea of darkness. There wasn't anything else above the water for as far as Sunny was able to see. After discovering that fact, he also realized something else. It was that he was wet, cold, and completely naked. In his defense, the clothing situation was the last thing one would think about when trying to save themselves from abyssal monsters. Also, it's not like someone was here to witness his stark paleness and private bits. Still, it was sort of cold. Sunny summoned the puppeteer's shroud and watched as dark grey garments covered his body. It even came with a pair of high, soft-soled leather boots. Clad in grey fabric and lusterless leather, he suddenly felt much safer. Not to mention warm. After that, Sunny sat down in the middle of the platform, as far away from water as he could, and tried to remember the unique characteristic of every explored region of the dream realm he could think of. Unfortunately, none of them matched this starless, dark void. Of course not, he thought with a bit of resentment. Even if some unlucky humans had ever come here, I doubt that they were able to return to the real world alive. Not with those things hiding underwater. Not yet desperate enough to leave the platform and try to swim away in search of land, Sunny decided to wait and see. Maybe something was going to change as time went by. With a soft sigh, he habitually looked for his shadow. However, due to the total darkness that surrounded him, it couldn't really be seen. He just barely felt its presence. This must be a paradise for you, right? All this gloom and not a star in sight. The shadow, of course, did not answer. Anyway, good job earlier. With a nod, Sunny lay down, using his hands as a pillow. Not thinking about much, he stared into the black sky and waited. The sound of the undulating waves was, actually, quite relaxing. After a while, he closed his eyes and listened. Minutes merged together, growing into hours. Suddenly, Sunny caught a slight change in the sound of the sea. It was as though something was shifting. He opened his eyes and noticed that one corner of the sky was slowly turning grey. Soon, a glimpse of a pale sun could be seen rising above the horizon. A new day had come to the starless void. And with it, the dark sea suddenly surged.